The
illustrious Jabba bids you welcome. I'm going to regret this.
I'm Pete Mitchell. He's Peyton Jones. And this is the Church Planter Podcast, brought to you by Church Planter Magazine. This week's episode of the Church Planter Podcast is being brought to you by MoGive. When you need to get your church to give Mo, you need MoGive. MoGiv.com. All right, if this is your first time listening to the show, then you probably don't know about MoGive or our joke with their commercial, but they are a paid sponsor of the Church Planter Podcast and dear to our hearts because we use them in our church. And in our nonprofit, and in pretty much everything we can, we use MoGive. Anyway, I'm Pete Mitchell, and you are listening to the Church Planter Podcast. This is kind of a unique episode for the Church Planter Podcast. If this is your first time listening to us, we normally have a lot of really great information for you on the Church Planter Podcast about church planting. This particular episode was an interview I did with a church planter in Ohio by the name of Daniel Sams. And I was interviewing him because for those of you that have been listening for a while, you know that I have a program on how to become a business growth consultant as a Bi-vocational church planter. And I train people on how to do that. And Dan has been through that program, and he is just tearing it up in Ohio, of all places, and rural Ohio. Whereas everyone else would say, oh, there's not enough business out there. He has found a killing of business out there. And is able to plant his church and do this on the side and make the money that he needs to make for his family. And so I actually interviewed him so I could pass this interview out to those who were thinking about coming through the program. And in talking with Peyton, I was like, hey, why don't we just play this on the podcast? Because I think our church planners will get a lot out of it. And so that's the purpose with today's episode. Go ahead and sit back and listen to this interview. I think you'll get a lot out of it. If you'd like to know about the program that I do, it's in the show notes. You can go to a webinar I've put together called bivowebinar.com. And anyway, I will look forward to talking with you guys later. Hey, everybody. Pete Mitchell here. And today I am joined by a church planter, one of the leading church planners, I should say, in all of his own backyard. I actually don't know how you lead as a church planter. But that's what I'm going to say. Daniel Sams, man, welcome to the call today.
Thanks very much. Glad to be here.
Did I say your last name right? Because I always see it, and the two M's throw me off.
Yeah, so long backstory on that. But yeah, Sams, you said it right.
Okay.
Well, it's funny because we had some crazy aunt who divorced one brother of one M Samses and added an M just to get back at the family. And I'm from the lineage of the bad ones.
Well, of course you are.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a church planter.
Yeah. Divorced one brother, married another. Said, well, we're not going to have one M. We're going to separate ourselves with one more M.
I like it. I like it.
Yep.
Well, hey, as we get into this, what we're going to be discussing on today's call is what you're doing as a consultant, because you've been just having tremendous success, and we'll get to that here in a second.
Yeah.
Before we get to that, I kind of want, if you would, just tell everyone a little bit about what you're doing on the church planting side, where you're doing it at, just so they understand, kind of the environment, if you will, that you're in, because you're not in Las Vegas or Los Angeles or New York where there's a ton of business. You're in kind of a unique little area. And by the way, I can hear your kid in the background, so that's awesome.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no, I'm literally, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's cool. I'm down. So
so I'm in Amherst, Ohio, which is about 35 minutes outside of Cleveland. It's a small town, kind of known for being a small town. And we're planting here, and we're primarily a house church network, but we have a monthly gathering where all the house churches come together. But my role is primarily to preach once a month and then equip house church leaders all the rest of my time. And we're planting house churches in all of the neighboring towns And then we're equipping, interestingly enough, we're equipping house church leaders and small group leaders in other churches in the area. So we're offering training that other churches use. In fact, not tomorrow, in about 36 hours or so, I'm headed to El Salvador, where we're going to train some house church leaders down there. So it's an exciting time. We're trying to kind of do an Apostle Paul style thing where we're equipping leaders who kind of do their thing and we just kind of support.
Now, I know a little bit of your background is you used to be at a much bigger church and then decided to do the church planning thing, if you will, or you felt called to that. So tell me a little bit about that transition and what that was like for you.
So I was part of a large church and was the chosen one, so to speak. I was the young, semi-hip pastor that everybody loved hearing preach. And so there were really cool conversations with the senior pastor about, man, we're going to have you take this thing over one day. And it was cool because around the time that's happening, headhunters are calling and saying, we want you would be great at this big mega church to, help them stay young and all that. And long backstory, but things were no longer working out at the church where I was at. The more my heart was for the unchurched, the less I fit in there. And what ended up happening is I found myself exiting out of there and had some cool opportunities, some great big churches with cool salaries and cool opportunities. And God just kept telling me no to every one of them. And I would get all the way up to me and one other guy, and either it wouldn't work out and they would say, they're like, you're perfect for this job, but we're just not going to hire you. We don't really have a reason for it. Or I would just tell them flat out, I'm like, I have no heart for this and I can't tell you why. And all the while, God was just warming my heart to church planting. And I'd always kind of been against church planting, honestly. Long backstory on that. I was part of a church that was building its own kingdom, and anybody else that was starting another kingdom was an enemy. And so God broke my heart, tore me up, reminded me that church planting was important, and then dropped me in it. And it's been an exciting ride. So yeah, here I am.
Wow, that's cool. So tell me, what made you decide to go through the consulting training course that I offer? I mean, what was it about it that you heard? Because I'm assuming you heard from the podcast when Tyrone and I did that one episode.
Yeah.
What was it about it that just made you go, you know what, I want to find out more about this?
Yeah. Well, I think in all seriousness, kind of been leading. When I first started church planting, didn't know what I was doing. I started listening to the podcast, heard a little bit about what you were doing in marketing, because that would pop up every now and then. And I'd really accidentally fallen into doing websites, and then I wanted to find a way to keep charging people. And so I started doing like Facebook ad marketing and Google AdWord management and things like that, PR type stuff that I just kind of said, sure, I can figure out how to do that. And so I was doing just a little bit of that, but just not making that much money on it. And when I heard about this, actually somewhere in there, I think you gave me a free half hour or so of advice. And you said, well, you really got to get into training and get into consulting. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds pretty good, but I don't really know how to do that. So when you did the podcast where we were talking about the opportunity to do the training, I really felt like God had been kind of pointing me in that direction for a little while already. And when I saw the opportunity, saw what could happen, that was when I was like, done, I'm going to do this. And I think I was listening and I didn't know how much it was going to cost. And I already knew, I'm like, this is something I'm supposed to do. And so once we talked through pricing, and I'm like, well, done. I think God is already leading in that direction. So let's do it. And so a little bit of leading, a little bit it was just I was listening to the podcast and hearing about it. And I knew in our context and in the future, pastors are going to have to be bivocational. I think even non-planting pastors. If we're just watching the writing on the wall, we need to start planning to be bivocational. And this seemed like the best opportunity I've ever come across for bivocational. And it has been.
So tell me, what have been, or what were some of your big takeaways when you went through that first initial 6 weeks of training where we go through, all that material? And obviously I'm not going to get into it on this call, but there's a ton of material that we go through. So tell me about what you were thinking as you were going through there. I'm sure there was a little bit of overwhelm, but were you like getting great ideas and like, hey, I'm going to go run out and take this over to this business? Or, tell me about your experience in that.
Yeah. Well, a few key things came out of there. One of them is, even though all the information is overwhelming, it's great stuff all the way through. So we would talk about a little bit of it, and it was just like, my brain started firing ideas and thinking, man, I know we could do this with a client, or I could apply it to me getting my own business. And lots of great stuff there. So even though it was overwhelming, every piece of it was cool. So I knew I was getting great content. But a lot of it just had to do with the paradigm shift that I went from being a church planter thinker who was like, well, I'll do things for as cheap as I can so I can just get by, to I'm going to charge as much as I possibly can because I need to make as much as possible in as little time as possible so that I can keep on serving the kingdom with the rest of my time. And so that changed everything. In fact, soon after, when I first started trying to do pitches to my connections and saying, hey, how about this? Somebody asked me about doing a website, and I normally would have pitched a website for, I don't know, not very much money. And I pretty much just quadrupled my price and gave him that. And he didn't bat an eye. And so right there, that probably saved me a month, or more than saved me a month. It made me a month of expenses. Actually 2 months once they pay the other half of it. And so that kind of stuff was just huge. It was me looking at things and saying, hey, I can play at this level. I can make money at this level. And it not only is it okay for me to ask for it, but asking for that much money probably helps me land more business than I would otherwise. And so that paradigm shift in just my thinking, that was huge. It's okay to ask for the right money.
I think you just hit on something that's really important there, because I think you're right. A lot of church planners have that mindset. Peyton and I have had this conversation many a time, because him being a missionary in Wales for 12 years, he was always poor, always broke. And so you have this mindset of, well, what's important to me is having the lowest price, buying the lowest priced item, whatever. And so then charging anything more than that, it goes against the grain, because you're thinking, I wouldn't do this.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, what you've hit on is you actually end up, as long as you're providing the value, right? I'm not just saying charge people a lot of money and, get it and run. You have to provide the value for it. But it is about taking the value that you provide seriously. And, one of the things that I always like to say is people who pay attention. And the more they pay, the more they pay attention. And every single time, I mean, literally without fail, every time I've tried to help someone out, give them a deal, it's been the worst client experience, because they don't take it seriously. They're not financially invested enough. So I think it's great that you experience that. I just want people to understand, we're not just saying too about, raising prices for the sake of raising prices, but the value is there. And what they're getting is there. But it is that mental barrier that you got to jump through and get over and be like, I can actually charge this and get it, and it's worth it.
Well, and for me, when I'm being paid that much for a job, I take it more seriously. And I prioritize that. I'm putting myself into it, and I'm less stressed about it. So when the guy who got a cutthroat deal on a website calls me up and wants to make changes, it's exasperating, right? Because I'm like, I'm not making enough money on this.
Yep.
And I've had a couple of those holdover deals that happens. But the guy that paid the premium price, and first of all, he respects my work and doesn't want to do as many changes, right? But when he does, I'm like, no problem, sir. Happy to help you out. I'm much more encouraged and excited to do the extra work and go the extra mile for that kind of client.
Yeah, it's so funny because I had one client who was only paying me about $2,500 a month, and that was it. I didn't have a retainer worked out, or a commission split. This is really before I knew what I was doing, when I was first getting started. And they were working me to the bone. And I remember this one day, I had this conversation, and the client literally said to me, what are you doing for me? What are you doing for me for this $2,500? And I was literally working about 40 hours a week on their stuff. And I'm like,
oh man,
are you kidding me? You basically got me as a full-time employee for $2,500 a month. I go, if you want to be done with this relationship, I'm fine with that. Let's end it. And it was like, they backed up real quick and they're like, uh-oh, you know what? I better watch what I say to this guy because I'm going to lose him, because I was doing so much, but I was only making $2,500 and it was killing me. And I mean, I live in Southern California. $2,500 a month is not enough to do anything. I mean, that's, you know, that's not even my house payment. My house payment's, I think, $3,400 a month. So, I mean, you know, what am I going to do with that? I need more than that to live. And I still have that person as a client today, but today, you know, like this last month, they paid me, let me think, pretty close to about 30 grand. Cause we renegotiated and I got a piece of the commission, and it's like, my mentality in working with them is completely different, right? Like they can ask me whatever they want. I'm like, whatever. Okay. You need me to do that? No problem. You know, you want to pay me 30 grand a month? I'll do that for you. Cause you know, I want to keep them happy because they're actually paying me, you know, decent money. So I completely get that. Tell me a little bit about, your experience, since you've been in the program. Cause I know you basically have been just killing it, and right out of the gate you started killing it. Tell me what you did differently than what you were doing, or how did things change for you so that way you were able to take what you had learned and immediately start implementing it?
One of the things is that confidence that came coming out of it. You know, I think you had even said, I've said it before, I came out of the training knowing how to make money. And not only the knowledge I got from it and the change of perspective, but knowing I've got some support structure. I've got some of the other guys in the course. I can reach out to you, so I know that I'm not going to get in over my head, or if I do, I've got resources for it. Even just the materials from the course I can refer to and say, man, what kind of ad should I run to this? Oh, I can pull stuff up. So that confidence allowed me to reach out to business owners that I had either direct or indirect connection with and say, how about this? And I get to come to the table, describe what I do. And so far, now I've had people not sign on, but I've not had anybody tell me no. I've had people say, man, we're not ready for that yet, but man, we'd love to have you. And I need to get better at my closing to pull those guys in. But I get to come into the conversation with confidence. And so that, I think that's a huge thing, is I just went to my current clients, applied that principle that it's always easier to sell to people already buying from you. And I essentially tried to upsell them. And then I went to the people that I'm connected with that didn't quite understand what I was doing yet. And I just said, let me just tell you what I'm doing, because I think I could help you a lot. And then we pitched that way. And I just got the word out. I used the memory jogger tool and went through, made a list of anybody I could think of, business owners, whatever, that I was connected with. And then I started reaching out to them, send a message and say, hey, love to get together, tell you what I'm doing right now. And that did really well. And just now, in fact, just this week, I did the thing where I got my CDs together and I'm sending out CDs to a huge run of potential clients. And actually tomorrow morning, I'm going to be doing my follow-up calls with them. Some of the follow-up calls, and then I've got another buddy who, while I'm in El Salvador, is going to make some other follow-up calls for me. Actually, Tyrone says he would do some follow-up calls for me.
Nice.
So I'm doing all that kind of stuff, networking with other guys. I have a friend of mine who is a sales consultant up here in the area, and I just touched base with him about what he does, and he says, I need you. He's like, if we could package this together, he's like, I've got businesses right now that would love to have you as an add-on, or if I bring you in, it's a win for me. And so he's begging to sell my services. And so that kind of stuff is exciting to me. So a lot of stuff still in the works. I mean, I've closed on a lot of business, but the truth is I still haven't asked for enough money. I have settled for some lesser paying clients. I should have gone right for the jugular on a few higher paying clients. I've got one really, really ace level client, and I've got a really solid commission out of him. And then I have some smaller clients that I have pretty high commission rate on, but it's not consistent. And so that's my big struggle right now, is I'm making good money, but not on the same steadiness. And it's because I haven't locked in those monthly rates with certain key people. And I'm jumping back into that. And I'm like, man, I gave away too much. Even in making and doing as well as I did, I've still given away too much, and I still need to ask for more.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that makes sense of what I'm doing. That seems to be working.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, just a little food for thought for you for the future. The more confident you get, because that's really where most of this stems from, is we all have, a confidence issue. At some point, we reach a point where we're like, you know what, I don't feel, totally comfortable asking for X amount of dollars, whatever it is. And we all have that. I was having this conversation with someone who I've, all about, Martin Howie, and I just made the comment to him, and I go, I realize I have that issue because I haven't just been telling people, hey, it's 25 grand for a meeting with me, basically. And that was, it's a long story what the 25 grand would cover. But I told him, I go, look, I realize I don't have the confidence, and I just have to get out there and do it. But the more you do, the more confident you get. And interestingly enough, I went out on an appointment last year. And it was for a real estate company that really wanted to recruit a lot of agents. And I really didn't want the deal. I was already busy. I was already making good money. And so I quoted them this outrageous number. I was like, all right, look, it's going to be 25 grand up front. And I think it started at like 7,500 a month. And then it went down to like 5,500 a month. And it was a 2-year agreement. And because of the way the structure of their company, it like didn't make any sense to get a piece of the business, because they don't make any money basically on the agent side. You make all the money on the escrow side and stuff like that in real estate. So bottom line is, I gave them that outrageous number, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but I remember them saying, well, it's like 80 grand the first year. And of course, this is not an employee, right? This is like, you get an hour of my week, a time a week from me, and I'll talk to you and tell you what to do. And so they were like, we're not going to do it. Anyway, literally they came back to me last week and was like, okay, we're ready to do that. and I'm sitting there looking at that going, I don't even know if I still want to do it. Like, I threw out that number because I didn't want to do it. And now you're coming back to me saying you actually want it. I don't even know that I want to do it for the 80 grand. It was like,
Pete, I know an up and coming consultant that would love to have that business. So I will jump on that grenade for you gladly.
I love it.
If you want to, I'll pray about it a little bit, but I think I'm willing.
I love it. Tell me about the client. Go ahead. What were we going to say?
I was going to say, I told one of my clients about, because he's got too much business since I started working with him, and he can't make enough product. And so I floated him the idea, and you and I might have talked about it, but I said, man, why don't you just sell the business? Like, sell, and if you got too many people coming to you, why don't you just get a percentage, get a cut, and get somebody else to do the work? And he's like, that's genius. I'm like, well,
right.
You did hire me, and I did learn from Pete Mitchell.
There we go. But you actually hit on something there. What I think a lot of businesses don't recognize is all the hidden assets they have in their business. And that's an asset. Like, if you've got more business coming in than you can handle, then there's a lot of things you can do, because for every problem you have in a business, there's another company that has the exact opposite problem. So you have too much business, you're going to find another company out there that doesn't have enough business. It's like, hey, why don't we give this to you? You have employees that don't have enough work. Well, you have too much work. It's like, hey, let me lease your employees. Let's, there's so many different, what we call joint ventures that you can do with companies that, and that's really where there's so much power and so much leverage. And for me, that's what the name of the game is really all about. It's about leverage. It's not having to actually do all of the work yourself. Like, what I see a lot of church planners do is, it's like they have the job mentality, because that's the way we were all raised, right? You go to school, you get good grades, you go out there and you get yourself a good job. Hopefully you can get some good benefits, things like that. And then it's like they enter this church planning world, and it's like, well, I'm trying to start a church. How do I do this with my time? They're trying to work a day job. They're trying to start a church at night, and they start neglecting their family because they're not around. They're doing all this stuff, or people are always over the house. And it's like, something's got to give here. And to me, the thing that makes the most sense to give is the job. And if you can find a way to replace that income, and not necessarily the time, but the income, leaving you the time during the day to work on your church plant and your evenings to spend with your family, or however that looks, in everyone's household. That's the name of the game. And for me, I've said this on the podcast many times, I basically stop working at 5. For the most part, that's my cutoff time. And the rest of the time until my kids go to sleep, that's my time with the family. And I don't work, after they go to sleep, but they go to sleep, I go to sleep. So, but I've reached that point in my life where it's like, look, I'm not going to knock myself out for business. And I think church planters have to be careful that they don't try and knock themselves out trying to do the church plant, trying to earn a living, trying to spend time with their family. I mean, there's no wonder there's so much burnout in the church planter world. One of the things I wanted to ask you about real quick is you've got a client who you helped make like 90 grand off of a referral letter or something like that. Can you tell everyone a little bit about that situation? Because that's really demonstrating the power of what you did for someone and why it's so valuable to those companies that we help.
Yeah, that was actually my first big win as far as something that I did for my client. So this guy actually is a fellow house church leader. He wouldn't call himself a planter, but awesome guy. He runs this business doing urban development where he buys and puts houses in Cleveland. And so his money is made on the rental of it long term. But you can imagine that he's waiting on a 6 or 8 year payout before he gets the money back from that. So he lives pretty lean. He lives pretty careful. He doesn't take a big payout. He just keeps investing because he's looking at this. We're looking at, for his properties now, it's something like a $12 million payout over lifetime, right? So he's like, man, the more of these I can do, the more money I can make. But about every third, he likes to generate more cash flow. So for every third house he flips, if he turns that over to an investor, gives him upfront cash, allows him to invest in more things, put some cash in his pocket. It's a great situation. So he brought me on and said, listen, I don't want to pay you a retainer. He says, but I'll give you a great commission if you can help me turn around these kind of things. And so I broke my rule and didn't have my retainer, but he was hungry. This guy's like, I need to make money right now. So I'm like, all right, you're hungry, and you're giving me a good commission on it. So let's do it. And so all I did, in fact, I told him at our first meeting, I said, dude, I'm worried that you're going to implement this stuff and it's going to go so well that you're going to be like, what the heck? This is nuts. And sure enough, that's what happened. All we did is a referral letter. He didn't have a huge list, right? He just went to the people who had invested with him. It was like 25 or 50 people. It wasn't a big list. So he got a book of stamps. I helped him edit the letter together. He sent it out. And we did some of the key things of we limited in time, limited in number. So they had to come in by a certain time and a certain number. And then we had an incentive. We were like, we're going to waive your management fees for the first year for you and whoever gets referred if you sign up by this time. And so right away, he starts moving units. He had something like 2 right away, which was the 90 grand. And actually, he has 2 more that were in queue, plus another 2 that are about to sign on. So even after the deal was over, there were more people saying, hey, we're still interested in investing. So even after that incentive we'd gotten done running it, it was still, and there's still people knocking down the door to invest with him. And so that's exciting. And we call it investment. They're really buying a house that he manages. But in fact, I think we talked about running that ad again. And the day I messaged him and say, hey, I really think we ought to run this ad again. I think we get a couple more out of it. He goes, wow. He says, you just emailed me this, and somebody just contacted me about this. And I said, well, man, an ad that works telepathically, I think is just the best. Like, I just don't think you can beat that. But yeah, it's probably turned around. Once it's all said and done, I'm waiting on the final signatures on everything. But that'll have turned around. Man, it'll be over 200 grand that it'll have turned around from that ad. And it was just a letter. That was all it was.
That's awesome. I mean, and that's one of the things that a lot of businesses don't recognize, and that is the time you stop going back to the well is when it comes up dry. And so people always say, I ran this ad or this letter or this newspaper ad, whatever, and these were the results. What should I do now? And I go, let's run it again. They go, are you serious? I'm like, well, let's do it. And we do it again and we get more results. And they're like, oh my gosh, it worked again. I'm like, it's kind of amazing, isn't it? Let's do it again, and you keep doing it until it finally isn't profitable. And in fact, the way that I call it is I go, you have a stable of ads and you're constantly using the frontline ads. And as soon as they stop working, you take them and you put them at the back of the list and then you use the next ones. And then eventually you're going to cycle back through them. And it's like, you don't need to create new stuff all the time. Once you have something that works, you just keep using it. And there's going to come a point where it doesn't pull. And so you stop and then you go back. I got this one client. You've probably heard of them. They like to simplify your church. So if you listen to the podcast, obviously that's who I'm talking about, Simplified Church. And we started running a Facebook ad. And it worked for us for almost 2 years. And we never had to change it at all. And like, soon as it stopped working, we started running a new one. And it's been out of circulation that just this week, we started running it again. And we're right back to where we were, getting, leads dirt cheap and things are working well. And I mean, that's just kind of what you do. And for us as consultants, that means it's not hard for us, right? Because
that's exactly right.
We don't have to come up with new stuff all the time. It's just, we use the same stuff and then we just recycle it and work our way back through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's perfect, man.
Well, hey, I appreciate your time, man. Is there anything that you would share to a church planner who's thinking about going through the training? What would be your advice to them? Like in looking at it, how do you know if it's the right thing for you to do or to not to do? Like what kind of advice would you give to the church planner trying to decide if this is the right thing for them?
So I would say if you can sit down and have an intelligent conversation with a person who is a businessman, then this is for you. I know that there are some guys that they can't get themselves together enough to sit down and have a professional meeting. To me, that's about the only criteria of this. If you can be professional enough to sit in front of somebody, look them in the eye, have a real conversation, you can do this. And I know for me, one of the things that was a barrier at first, where I was thinking might be a barrier, would be the money. Because I looked at it, I'm like, man, for me, that's a huge amount of money, like huge. But I was like, you know what, this is a game changer, and I think this will work. And it did. So that I lost count of how many times. So, I mean, I don't remember when our class ended. Was it August, September that we somewhere in there?
I don't remember either. I'd have to actually go back and look.
I think we might have gone through the 6 weeks. I mean, it was maybe August, somewhere in there, because I think I started paying for it in June or July. So it's been less than 6 months. That class has paid for itself more than 6 times over. In a matter of maybe 2 months, it paid for itself 6 times over, and we're way past that now. So I've lost count. So think about it, in 6 months, less than 6 months, it's paid for itself multiple times over. Don't let the money be an issue for not doing it. Jump in. It's worth it, assuming you're going to apply it. And I was hungry enough to apply it. In fact, we talk about the whole people who pay attention.
Yep.
And I was going to make sure this worked. And man, God moved. I would say that there is certainly the Lord's work in this has made a difference, but it's been huge. Glad I've done it.
Well, that's awesome, man. Well, hey, Dan, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for sharing these thoughts. It's been very helpful for me to hear that coming from you. And I know people are thinking about it right now. The church planners are thinking, hey, I might do this. I think this might help them. I mean, if you're listening to this and you want to find out if it's right for you, set up a time to have a call with me and let's just talk. I mean, I'm not going to sell you on the phone. That's not the way that I work, because I want it to be for the right people, because I don't want to take your focus off of planning a church. And frankly, some people I don't think it's going to be right for. And so I'd like to have that conversation with you and let's just talk about it. if you need me to talk with you and your spouse, I'm cool with that. I mean, I did that with Dominic and his wife. And I literally, I was like, dude, I think your wife should be the one doing this because she is like tearing it up. Like I had dinner with them in Texas a couple weeks back when I was out there. And again, I was like, man, your wife is the one who needs to be doing this because she's the consultant. It was funny. It was really funny. But, I'll talk to, both of you and your spouse and let's find out if this is the right thing. If it is, cool. If it's not, no harm, no foul. We're not going to lose anything by just having that conversation. So anyway, Dan, thanks so much. I appreciate your time, man.
Cool. Thank you, Pete. You take care, man.
You've been listening to the Church Planter Podcast with Pete Mitchell and typically Peyton Jones. We will be back next week with one of our regular episodes of the Church Planter Podcast. If you would like to know more about the Bi-vo training program that I have, then head on over to bivowebinar.com. It's in the show notes. And I've put together a great little webinar that you can sit back and watch. There's nothing to buy on the webinar. It's an informational webinar. And if at the end of it, you're like, hey, this is something I want to know more about, you'll be able to set a one-on-one call with me, and I'll be happy to walk you through some of the intricacies of the program. But anyway, head on over to bivowebinar.com. I look forward to talking with you. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us for another weekly episode of the Church Planter Podcast with Pete Mitchell and Peyton Jones. We'd love to hear your comments on this episode of the Church Planter Podcast. Visit us online and let us know what you thought at churchplanterpodcast.com. If you subscribe to us via iTunes and have enjoyed the podcast, leave us a positive review. The more positive reviews we receive in iTunes, the more iTunes will promote us to other church planners who would benefit from this show. This podcast is brought to you by the Church Planter Magazine, which is available in the iTunes newsstand or online via churchplantermagazine.com.